I am Clarence John Laughlin, writer, photographer, lecturer, and above all, first and foremost, a book collector. I'm here appearing from the recesses of my loft to introduce you to some of the treasures of my library and the character and the atmosphere of this attic. Okay? We don't have enough film. So how do we do it? Oh boy. There's something else I saw that's got to be in. It's got to be shown.
Okay. Are you ready to do this?
Now wait a minute, let me think some more. Don't start rushing me because we're going to end up by wasting film.
Okay.
Let me think some more how we're going to do this. You've got how many minutes left?
Well, we've got about...
Reacting only to the moment at hand in business and personal relationships, Laughlin seemed to burn his bridges at every turn. His dominating personality and volatile temperament were proven handicaps. These unfortunate traits made some people weary of contact or professional dealings with him.
Now, while we're at it, before he turns the thing on...
It's on now, by the way.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
He had no trouble speaking or writing exactly what was on his mind.
You better cut it off again.
Why is that?
Because I want to tell Day there's a question here we ought to settle before we start. First, how I got started, you know, on books. Secondly, how I got started on the collecting. And thirdly, what's happened? Why, you know. But the fourth thing is, shall we discuss here, before we start any other location, what the categories are that the library is divided into? I'm not going to read all this stuff. I'm just going to read the 11 different categories.
Okay.
You want to do that here, or you want to do this elsewhere?
I think it would be good to have it in the beginning.
Yeah, I think so too. Because at least from the very beginning, they ought to...
Yeah,
it'll help to make things smoother later on.
Sure.
Okay, well, I'll have... it's all right if we have some sheets that we consult as we go along.
Yeah, I was just setting all the levels right then. Okay.
His intentions were not malicious, and his incessant, uncompromising requests for perfection were well-intended if egocentric.
Now, wait, one more thing.
Yeah.
In connection with how I got started, I'm going to have to use this book. So I'm going to open the book, and David and I are going to look at it. And you're going to have to shoot it afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
After we finished.
Right.
Okay, let's put the book over here so I won't have to squirm around to get at it. And, boy, those lights really bother me.
Clarence discovered photography when he was 25 and taught himself how to use a simple 2.5 by 2.25 view camera. He began working as a freelance architectural photographer. He then moved on to be employed by such varied agencies as Vogue magazine and the US government. After a conflict with then-editor Edward Steichen, he eventually split from Vogue. Thereafter, he worked almost exclusively on personal projects, utilizing a wide range of photographic styles and techniques, from straightforward geometric abstractions of architectural features to elaborately staged allegories utilizing models, costumes, and props. His work contains many elements of surrealism, which was more common in European photography at the time. Many historians credit Laughlin as being the first true surrealist photographer in the United States.
I didn't come to New Orleans till I was 5 years old with my parents. And we moved into a little shotgun house on what used to be called Berlin Street. This was before the beginning of World War I. And by the time I was between 7 and 8 years old, one of the most distinct desires that I can remember is that I wanted to go to a library. I don't know how this started, but it must have been triggered off by something which I've no longer completely remember. But I remember when I first went to the library, I had to go with my father. Although my father was Irish and Scotch, my mother's family was French and Creole. And at that time, children of 7 years old or 8 years old never went anywhere alone. They always went with one of their parents.
What year was this?
Well, I don't remember the exact year. I was 1905. I was born, and I was 5 years, so it would have been 1910. It would be about 1912. And, but that's not very important. I began by reading every fairy tale book in the library. I think after that, after I had exhausted those, I started reading books on sort of adventure books, Indian wars and so on. But within about 2 or 3 years after that, I started reading science. I first started reading books on astronomy because at that time, and for a good while afterwards, I had hoped that I would become a scientist of some kind. But then, since my father died near the end of World War I, in 1918, he died from that terrible flu epidemic. I got 1 year of high school, and then I had to go to work.
Laughlin was devastated when his father died. His grief was compounded by a priest who promised that God would save his ailing parent if he prayed hard enough. This left Laughlin with a deep suspicion of religion that surfaces frequently in his work.
It must have been around 1920 that I started buying books. But
that was in New Orleans?
Oh, sure. I never got out of New Orleans for a long, long time after that.
How was the library arranged? What kind?
Now wait just a moment. I want to show you an example of the kind of fairy tale books I was reading.
Yeah.
This was issued in 1904, and it's typical of the beautiful books which are being turned out for children of that period. It has a gilded, embossed, gilded cover. Inside of this book, the little girl who owned this book, who lived in London in 1915, had made a little bookmark, and it had ribbons. The ribbons have fallen to pieces. It was tied with a little ribbon, and it would be inserted to keep the place in the book.
That's the same bookmark?
That's the same bookmark, and what has happened to this little girl, there would be no way of telling. But perhaps this is, when you start to think about this, I think it's very touching. Perhaps this is the last memento left to this child. She must be dead by now. Now, the man who illustrated almost all of these books was a man named H.J. Ford. He lived from about 1880, I think, to sometime in the 1930s. And he was one of the great Victorian illustrators. He did marvelous dragons and monsters. For instance, here is a translation of an African fairy tale. And this is the bunyip. It was a monster that lived in the swamps. This, he's carrying a manatee on his back. That's a fish-like creature. Now I'll show you an example. He was not only magnificent with in his use of black and white, but also in his use of color. And here is one of the color plates. The mermaid who's taken the knight, the armored knight that she's in love with, to the bottom of the sea, and she says, "Listen, listen," said the mermaid, "to the shell which will tell you of the mysteries of the sea."